Every Southerner at one point or another has been yelled at by an elderly person to get off their property. It's a rite of passage of sorts. Well, have you ever had that same person disappear into thin air immediately afterwards? Aunt Jenny Johnston is known for this. She's also known for much, much more. Known as a good Christian woman who served her community by those on her good side, a venomous and unforgiving woman by those on her bad side. Stick around for the story of revenge and vengeance that only a mountain woman can offer. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture. Some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. Louisa Elizabeth Jane Betts Brooks Johnston was born in Kentucky on January 22, 1826, to James and Annie Bates. At the age of 14, she married 35-year-old Willis Brooks and moved to the Appalachian foothills in Lawrence County, Alabama. Yeah, try that mess today. Anyways, Willis took to calling his wife Jenny, and the couple ran a successful inn on the heavily traveled Byler Road, all the while having 8 children. The family was able to make ends meet with the income from the inn, and the tight-knit family worked hard to make every day better than the last. Then, the American Civil War began. For the most part, the Appalachian mountain folk opposed the war. They viewed it as a rich man's war. They went about their daily lives deep in the hills and avoided the conflict as best they could. But by the fall of 1861, Southern recruitment had fell sharply. The Confederate Congress offered several incentives to boost their ranks, but numbers continued to drop. Ultimately, a draft was instated. All white men between the ages of 18 and 35 were called into service, with very few exceptions. And for the mountain folks, these exceptions made their disdain of the war even worse. At first, exceptions for war production jobs, civil servants, military officers, clergymen, and teachers with 20 students or more were put into place. None of these exceptions fit into mountain life. Then, another exception was put into place. Drafted men could hire a substitute. They could pay a man $300 to take his place, an amount so far out of reach for mountain folk that they would have only laughed, if not for their growing hatred of the situation. Then another exemption was put into place in 1862. Plantation owners with more than 20 slaves were given a pass. And to make matters even worse, an impressment order was issued, giving the Confederate government the right to take food, crops, fuel, and land from people who couldn't pay their taxes. Mountain folk barely eked out a living. The vast majority of them didn't own slaves. They were a culture set apart all to themselves, and all these new exceptions seemed to purposely single out the family of the hills to be drafted. Appalachian communities quickly became a powder keg, just waiting for something to set them off. The Confederates then formed the Home Guard, a group of men unable to serve, whether it be because they were too young, too old, disabled, whatever. The Home Guard's main responsibility was to hunt down draft dodgers and seize properties and supplies from the poor. Eventually, a troop of the Home Guard made their way to the Brooks Inn. There are a few speculations as to why. Some say Willis Brooks was a Union sympathizer. Others say Brooks refused to pay taxes, or they were keeping their oldest son, John, from the draft. Either way, the Home Guard came calling. The reasons for the visit or the escalation that took place isn't completely known, but whatever happened resulted in the troop of 8 Home Guard members taking the now 57-year-old Willis from the house at gunpoint. There, they beat and bound him before hanging him from a tree in the front yard, in front of Jenny and the children. Oldest son John tried to intervene, but was shot dead by the Home Guard. They then took to shooting the dangling body of Willis. Before they left, the Home Guard set fire to the Brooks home. With the Home Guard now gone, Jenny lowered her husband's body and laid it beside that of her son John. She gathered the rest of her children around and had all the males lay a hand on their father's chest. Jenny made them all swear a blood oath, even 5-year-old Henry, that they would never rest until all 8 killers were dead. Jenny then set out at teaching her sons to shoot, and took great pride in it. She is quoted as saying that she, quote, wasted a many a keg of powder teaching my boys how to shoot, end quote. The Home Guard's leader was the first to fall to the Brooks family. In 1864, Jenny and son Mac hid outside his home, waiting for him to leave for the day. Once outside, he was shot dead from his horse. Jenny and Mac dragged the body into the woods. There, Jenny cut off the head, placed it in a burlap sack, and carried it home. Jenny then boiled the head, making lye soap. She then scrubbed the skull clean and used it as a soap dish for the rest of her life. As if Appalachian commitment to one's mother was not enough, this act cemented the blood oath the sons had taken. After all, would you tell your mom no after seeing her do all that? The Brooks boys then set out over the next several years, hunting down the remaining Home Guard members, taking one out, then hiding out in Texas and Oklahoma until the heat died down before returning again. The boys became known as the Brooks Gang, and their exploits eventually led to 40 years of feuds with other families across the South and West. Jenny Brooks remarried in 1878 to a man named Jacob Johnston, Jacob's first wife having died in 1877. Jacob's family strongly objected to this union, leading to the Brooks-Riddle feud, one of many documented feuds the Brooks Gang is known to have been involved with, most notably the Brooks-McFarland feud in Oklahoma. All of these proved to be interesting research in their own rights. Ultimately, the gunslinger lifestyle of the Brooks boys led them to an early grave. Only Jenny's youngest son, Henry, survived the decades of feuding. He returned to Alabama to care for a now aging Jenny Johnston, but he too still died from gunfire. Back home in Alabama, Henry had turned to moonshining. One day, his still was surrounded by a posse under the leadership of Sheriff John Robinson. Though severely outnumbered, Henry decided to open fire. Henry died from 12 gunshot wounds. At the end of it all, Jenny Johnston outlived all of her sons, and the Brooks gang killed all of the members of the Home Guard, except one. By this time, she was affectionately known in the community as Aunt Jenny, serving as an herb doctor and midwife. Aunt Jenny Johnston lived to the age of 98. She told people how proud she was of her sons. She's quoted as saying, "They died like men. My sons died with their boots on." Aunt Jenny Johnston died on March 29, 1924. On her deathbed, the attending preacher asked if there was anything else he could do for her. She only replied with, "I want to wash my hands." So, she was brought a pan of water and the soap dish she had made back in 1864. One last time, she washed her hands in a murderer's skull. Aunt Jenny Johnston dried her hands, closed her eyes, then passed away. Jenny Johnston was known to walk with a cane and carved a notch in it every time one of the Home Guard members were killed. It's said that Jenny's ghost still lurks the area of the old home site near the Bankhead National Forest because her cane is missing one notch. The Brooks gang were never able to complete their blood oath. There is an old cemetery near the home site. It's said that if you go there at night, you can see a glowing green light. It will begin to come closer and closer, and if you listen closely, you'll hear Aunt Jenny Johnston warn you to get out, or you'll be next. Other stories actually report to see Aunt Jenny. Many a parked car near the old home site report seeing an elderly Jenny Johnston come up to the car, telling them to get off of her property before disappearing into thin air. Jenny Johnston has become somewhat of a folk hero to the local community. Her story is retold in libraries and schools year after year. Up until recently, the old home still stood. Sadly, it burned down in 2010. No one was ever caught or arrested in the arson. Aunt Jenny's headstone, too, has been repeatedly stolen and replaced. The descendants finally gave up replacing it, so now her grave is covered by a full-length slab. I've read somewhere that someone said, "It's sad to think that the legend might die out in time, with no little house or headstone to prompt the telling of the story of Aunt Jenny Johnston." Yes, it's horrible how the grave has been treated, but whoever made that statement doesn't know Southerners like they claim they do, especially the Appalachian people. Just like Aunt Jenny and her sons, I don't think this story will ever fade away. Not without a good fight, anyway.